Now, data is at the heart of many a health discussion these days, and you might say the same for other areas of public policy. Increasingly, artificial intelligence will sift, interpret, and even act upon data streams without people being in the loop. That's led the White House to plan an AI Bill of Rights. Certainly, currently, they're conducting a public consultation, but say their aim is to clarify the rights and freedoms we expect data-driven technologies to respect. Well, maybe it'll just generate more of those lists of choices that we so often ignore by ticking accept all. Or maybe something more tangible is afoot. We've unleashed the all too real intelligence of David Grossman on the story.
Many times in human history, our world has been transformed by what are known as general-purpose technologies. The printing press, electricity, computers, they've changed almost every aspect of everything we do. The next general-purpose technology, already turning the present into a perhaps unrecognisable future, is artificial intelligence, or AI.
So it affects, people directly. When you go to the doctor and you have a voice recognition system that's directing you to, make a time slot, or when you go to work and you sign in using facial recognition technology, or, when you even fly somewhere and you're deciding what flight to use, and AI might be helping to decide, which one's the cheapest for you and which one should we direct them to, and even the advertisements that you might see.
Although there is an OECD framework of AI principles, so far it's been largely up to the technology companies to decide what the rules of the game are. Maybe not for much longer. In an article in Wired magazine, President Biden's top science advisors have called for a Bill of Rights for an AI-powered world. Some possibilities include the right to be told when AI is influencing a decision that affects your civil rights or civil liberties, the freedom from too much surveillance, the right to redress if your life is harmed by AI.
I think it's a good starting point to codify and specify some of these vaguer AI principles, AI ethics statements that we've seen recently from companies and governments in this space. So, yeah, I think it's a great first step towards getting more specific guidelines for how AI systems should be developed.
But some have questioned whether America and the world need specific new laws to deal with AI. Why not, they argue, use the legislation already on the statute books?
There's this kind of myopic focus on AI rather than kind of thinking about it more broadly. And, bringing up this sort of analogy, the original Bill of Rights was created because the government could be monarchical. It doesn't hold for, AI, because if you're worried about the power of technology companies or any other companies using AI systems, and you're worried that they might become too powerful, they sit under the government. The government can use its constitutional powers.
Another objection to an AI Bill of Rights is that it risks handing the advantage to China, which already says it wants to be the world's premier AI power by the end of the decade. Earlier this month, the Pentagon's first chief software officer resigned in protest at what he said was the slow progress that the US was making, partly because of debates about AI ethics. Nicholas Chalian told the FT, "We have no competing fighting chance against China in 15 to 20 years. Right now, it's already a done deal. It's already over, in my opinion."
I personally think the opposite is true. I think that China is not poised to overtake the US in technological leadership across this space. Not even a decade ago, some of the major paradigm-shifting breakthroughs in deep learning, and some of these are not even implemented at scale in terms of real-world commercial applications. So I think there's a long road ahead, and the first step is actually just understanding the nature of the competition and the fact that it is this marathon, and we're still in the early legs.
If AI is as powerful as we expect it to be and has as big an impact on our lives, will human laws really be strong enough to contain it, even if we want them to? And working out the correct balance between unconstrained innovation and human protection seems beyond our current levels of intelligence, artificial or otherwise.
Well, let's explore this question then with Nicolas Chaillan, who's just stepped down as the Chief Software Officer of the US Air Force and Space Force, and he featured in David Grossman's report there, and Azeem Azhar, the technology investor and author. Welcome to you both. Azeem, clearly there are lots of potential benefits from AI, but what's the nightmare scenario? What are the pitfalls in your view?
Well, we've already lived through one of the pitfalls of AI, which is that it can control what we see, it can control how we might choose to behave. Just looking at the spread of disinformation and fake news on social media platforms, where what we see is driven by these algorithms, and we've seen how that creates division within our society. That's a clear and present issue. Of course, there are other nightmare scenarios, the idea of developing weapons that can operate themselves autonomously without humans being able to be in the loop to prevent them going wrong. That's further down the track, but today I think we already see some of the real risks and harms.
Nicolas Chaillan, from your perspective, do you share that assessment, or do you have a slightly different view of the nightmare scenario, if you like?
This is very correct, right? I think what's very different also when it comes to the military side of this is that China has the great advantage of mandating their companies to work with them, and there's no disparity of capability between the Chinese commercial side of the house and the Chinese government. Mm-hmm. When you look at the U.S. side, though, my whole point when I say we're losing against China is that, yes, the U.S. companies are leading, but there's no implementation of those capabilities inside of the military, and really we're getting behind. And in the meantime, you see, AI jets being flown and effectively the best U.S. pilots losing every single time against those AI capabilities, which effectively puts our nation at risk and is really ending up looking like an existential threat to our nation.
But Nicholas, do you think in that sense the Bill of Rights is just something the US and other Western societies can't afford to do at this point?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit short-sighted if we end up doing this on a per nation basis, right? If we don't ensure, very much like the nuclear treaties, that, and same for the space offensive side of the house, that these are not spread across all nations, particularly China and Russia, then we are shooting ourselves in the foot. And we have to find a balance between, of course, making sure that the ethics and the privacy and our really vision of our nation is really respected, but at the same time we don't want to end up having to learn Mandarin in a few years because we completely failed at protecting our nation as well.
Azeem?
Well, we have to have societies that we want to live in, that respect our rights. That's what we fight for and what we look to protect. And a digital Bill of Rights does that. It also helps us shore up some of the weaknesses. What we discovered over the last 4 or 5 years were that foreign adversaries could use social media platforms, amongst other things, to sow dissent and discord. And they use the AI systems within those platforms to magnify polarization. That's everything that any adversary wants. They want the civilians of their opponents to be arguing over vaccines and 5G and God knows what else before the battle starts.
But in terms of this contest for national advantage, if you like,
yes.
Do you have any sympathy with Nicholas's position that we can't afford to hang about and get the codes right, the ethical codes and the other steps? Or do you think that is an essential part in terms of the sequencing of the Western response to the Chinese AI challenge?
I think you have to do all of them together. And one reason you can't leave the ethics and the rights aside is that we live in this interconnected world. In the last few months, there's a Chinese company called BGI which helps doctors with genome sequencing, gene scans. That's a really important healthcare intervention, and that's used very, very widely in the West, in the US and across Europe. And recently, it's been rumoured that BGI is sending that information to the Chinese government, the genome sequences of people in the West. Now, we would be protected from things like that with an AI Bill of Rights because that would enshrine the use of that type of data. So, of course, it's not enough, but it starts to shore up the weaknesses.
Nicholas, can you see that point? And can you see also the point about moral equivalence or moral parity, that actually there are important reasons why Western countries might want to put this in place ahead of China?
No, I mean, look, absolutely. Ethics are very important, right? And I'm certainly not disputing the fact that we need to make that a top priority. But like I said, it shouldn't be the only priority. Mm-hmm. And we shouldn't also dismiss the fact that, honestly, China will not care at all about this AI Bill of Rights whatsoever. They're going to keep doing what they're doing. In fact, they keep hacking and getting into systems continuously, putting critical infrastructure at risk in the United States again and again. We've seen it, countless times. So it's not some, new fancy AI a bit of rights that's going to change their behavior unless they agree to do it. And even if they agree to do it, I would argue they might not even actually do it. They might do it in a way that's effectively behind the scene, where we can't even demonstrate that they are continuing to pursue these malicious behaviors. So we can also be short-sighted and just completely ignore the real world we live in. We all want to be in this dream world of everybody is nice and getting along together, but that's not the world we live in.
Well, it's another feature of the world we live in, a sort of fundamental difference here. China putting a lot of money into military AI projects, but keeping quite tight control on its civilian sector, whereas in the West, Google and some of the other giants are big players in this research, aren't they? And that, there's commercial factors here as well as strategic ones.
There are commercial factors, and it's fascinating to note that the Chinese government in the last few months has really clamped down on the power of the independent technology companies in China. It's also brought in very, very stringent rules around consumer privacy, whereas in the United States, American internet companies are allowed to do what they like, and they don't have to respect consumers' privacy in quite the same degree.
OK, I just want to pick up on one point you said earlier about the company BGI. They say they don't provide data to China on
That's
patients.
Right.
OK.
They do say that, but I think Nicholas's point is that there is a revolving door between Chinese state and Chinese enterprise that we can never be quite sure what's going on.
All right, Nicholas, you have said, as far as I understand your quoted remarks, it's already over. So in this sense, is this rearranging of the deck chairs on the AI Titanic?
Well, I think the key point that was missing in my quote, that it is over if we don't change and act now. And we have time, and I think we're running out of time, and we need to wake up immediately and take action. What I see at the Pentagon is leaders being complacent and having a lack of sense of urgency, ensuring that we continue saying that China is a near-peer adversary, where already it's leading in some of the more critical aspects of innovation. Look at cyber offense and defense. You look at artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and chips, right? The supply chain is a disaster right now. We have no access to a complete autonomy of creation of those chips, which are foundational for artificial intelligence again.
Okay.
And if we don't wake up and we don't take action now, we're going to run out of time.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Nicolas Chélan and Azeem Azhar. Very quickly on the papers, The Telegraph picking up on the China theme. Liz Truss were too dependent on them. The Guardian, sleepwalking into winter COVID chaos, our lead story, of course. Booster jabs will prevent the lockdown, says the Chancellor in the Times. And the Mail on why did the palace cover up the truth on the Queen. We are out of time, I'm afraid, for this evening. Emily will be back at the tiller on Monday. Have a great weekend.